Imagine being in a room with billionaires, executives, and impossible deals, while a silent kitchen assistant watches everything. What if the person everyone overlooked held the key to justice? Stick around to see how courage, intelligence, and strategy turned arrogance into downfall. The boardroom sat atop Manhattan's most prestigious skyscraper, its floor-to-ceiling windows revealing the city stretching endlessly below, a mosaic of ambition and wealth. Dark oak paneling and Italian marble reflected the golden glow of crystal chandeliers, creating an atmosphere of power and refinement. At the head of the long conference table, Jonathan Miller, CEO of Miller Corp., adjusted his $3,000 navy suit and surveyed the room with a practiced air of dominance. Beside him, Michael Turner, the young, impatient vice president, tapped his fingers against the polished surface, a predatory gleam in his eyes. Across the table, Wei Jiang, the Chinese billionaire and founder of Dragon Tech Industries, sat quietly, his black suit simple and unassuming, his dark hair perfectly aligned, his posture calm and unwavering. He did not speak English, not because he could not, but because he chose not to. His silence was a shield, a deliberate defiance against the presumptions and arrogance of Western executives who assumed authority by default. Andre Silva moved quietly among the chairs, balancing trays of coffee and meticulously organizing documents, each movement precise yet unobtrusive. At 26, his black skin and short hair marked him as an unassuming presence, easily overlooked in the grandeur of the room. But beneath that invisibility, Andre's eyes missed nothing. Every subtle smirk, every condescending glance, every whispered insult directed at Wei Jiang was absorbed with the acuity of someone who had spent a lifetime learning to see what others thought was hidden. He noticed Jonathan's smug smiles, Michael's nervous laughter, the barely concealed microaggressions that peppered the conversation like hidden mines. To the executives, he was nothing more than a catering assistant. To Andre, he was the silent observer of power, prejudice, and opportunity. As Jonathan launched into his presentation, outlining the opportunity of acquiring Dragon Tech's surgical robotics for a mere $50 million, the room exuded confidence. Michael leaned back, arms crossed, whispering sarcastically to Jonathan, "Do you really think he understands what we're saying?" Jonathan chuckled, replying, "Who cares? It's $50 million for a quiet little Asian company. A deal this good doesn't need comprehension." Their laughter, quiet but sharp, hovered in the air like a challenge. Wei Jiang remained motionless, his gaze steady, his hands resting lightly on the table. His translator, a middle-aged man who often leaned forward to whisper interpretations, shifted uneasily. Andre noted the translator's discomfort, the subtle hesitation that betrayed the tension. Andre's mind wandered briefly to his childhood, a mosaic of lessons learned from the shadows. He had grown up watching his mother, a domestic worker, move through the offices of wealthy families, observing mergers, acquisitions, and negotiations she was too low in the hierarchy to influence. Yet, through whispered conversations and careful observation, young Andre learned the invisible rules of power. He learned that strength often lived in patience, that knowledge could outweigh authority, and that every expression, pause, or gesture carried meaning beyond the words spoken. Every insult he had absorbed, every slight ignored, had been filed in his memory for moments like this, when observation alone could hold a quiet, invisible sway. The executives, convinced of their dominance, continued to speak over the silence. Jonathan waved his hands dramatically, extolling the transformative potential of Dragon Tech's technology, painting projections of market conquest and billion-dollar profits. Michael scoffed at the devices themselves, dismissing them as little robots for surgeries that could be replicated by any startup in San Francisco for a fraction of the cost. The arrogance in their tone was palpable, the underestimation of Wei Jiang near complete. Andre felt the controlled rage build inside him, though he remained outwardly calm, moving with the efficiency of someone who understood that timing was everything. Wei Jiang's silence, far from indicating ignorance, was a test. He watched the room with the same patience Andre had honed over years of studying subtle power dynamics. Every misjudgment, every act of condescension, every assumption of superiority was noted and measured. To the executives, his stillness was frustrating, even insulting. To Andre, it was a signal. A hidden power was at play, one that did not announce itself but would inevitably demand recognition. The tension in the boardroom mounted as Jonathan pressed for immediate closure, waving documents and emphasizing urgency, mocking both culture and innovation. "We don't have time for these Eastern games," Michael muttered under his breath, shaking his head at Wei Jiang's measured calm. Andre's eyes narrowed imperceptibly. He catalogued every insult, every dismissive remark, every underestimation of both intelligence and dignity in the room. The foundation for a reversal was quietly taking shape. In that room of wealth and authority, one invisible observer and one underestimated billionaire were quietly preparing to demonstrate the real value of skill, patience, and understanding. By the end of the first hour, the boardroom's grandeur had not softened the sting of prejudice or diminished the arrogance of those who believed themselves untouchable. Wei Jiang remained composed. Andre Silva remained unseen, yet fully aware. The stage was set. The invisible power reversal was imminent. While the boardroom descended deeper into chaos, Andre Silva moved with the quiet precision of someone fully aware of the storm he was quietly observing. To the executives, he was a background figure, carrying trays, straightening papers, and ensuring the room remained immaculate. Yet beneath that calm exterior, his mind raced, cataloging insults, gestures, and every word laced with arrogance or prejudice. Andre's confidence stemmed from a foundation few in that room could imagine. He had spent 3 transformative years at Shanghai University, earning an engineering degree in advanced robotics. Fluent in Mandarin and deeply immersed in Asian tech culture, he had learned not only technical expertise but also the subtleties of strategic thinking, the unspoken codes of negotiation, and the art of patience in the face of ignorance. Andre's memories drifted briefly to Beijing, winter of 2021, when he first met Wei Jiang at a lecture on medical robotics. The room had been filled with scholars, students, and engineers, all eager to witness the innovations of DragonTech Industries. Wei Jiang spoke passionately about the potential of artificial intelligence-assisted surgery to democratize healthcare, reduce errors, and save lives in underserved regions. Young Andre, timid but curious, approached at the end of the lecture, speaking in rudimentary Mandarin. "Do you believe that a young Brazilian can contribute to this type of research?" he had asked, unsure of how his question would be received. Wei Jiang's gaze, piercing yet kind, met his own. "Creativity has no color or nationality," he had replied. "You have curiosity. That is all you need." In the months that followed, Andre became an unofficial protégé, learning not only about medical robotics but also about strategic foresight. Wei Jiang had taught him how to observe, how to measure human behavior, and how to detect deception and arrogance in the most accomplished of people. He had learned about signals in silence, the messages conveyed without words, and the patterns that revealed intent long before it was spoken. The Morse code of tapping fingers, subtle shifts in posture, the micro-expressions of impatience, all were signs Andre could read with expert precision. Back in the Manhattan boardroom, those lessons were coming alive. Wei Jiang's subtle table taps, nearly imperceptible to anyone else, carried coded messages. Andre recognized each one instantly. He adjusted his approach, aligning his movements to anticipate cues that the executives had no idea were being sent. Jonathan and Michael continued their relentless barrage of sarcasm and arrogance, mocking Wei Jiang's technology, his culture, even the deliberate calm that challenged their assumptions. Every condescending remark about little robots for surgery or slow reading of documents ignited a controlled fire within Andre. He felt the familiar sting of prejudice, but it no longer intimidated him. It energized him. Andre reached into his pocket discreetly and glanced at his phone. A brief, coded message to his sister Camilla, an investigative journalist at the New York Herald. She would act as his strategic ally, feeding him intelligence on Miller Corp's previous dealings and any legal leverage he could use. Camilla was already a master at uncovering hidden networks of corporate misconduct, and together they formed a silent, invisible strike force. Andre's fingers hovered over the keyboard as he reviewed the incoming files. SEC complaints, internal, emails and reports of predatory acquisitions targeting Asian companies. Each document confirmed what he had long suspected. Jonathan and Michael were no mere executives. They were predators, assuming cultural superiority as cover for systematic exploitation. Yet the most important asset was not documents, nor even Wei Jiang's vast intellect. It was timing, patience, and perception. Andre measured each movement in the room, the shifting chairs, the tapping pens, the almost imperceptible glance that betrayed arrogance. He noted which moments the executives were most vulnerable, most prone to oversharing or displaying their condescension. Every insult they flung, every racist joke whispered behind hand gestures became ammunition in a strategy he had been refining for months in his mind. Andre's internal monologue was meticulous, controlled, and deliberate. Observe, wait, collect, strike. Timing is everything. Let them underestimate us. They always do. They assume visibility is power. They don't see the invisible. He smiled faintly at the irony. Those who saw themselves as the arbiters of knowledge and influence were oblivious to the intelligence, quietly watching them, cataloging every misstep. As Wei Jiang continued his subtle signals, Andre moved seamlessly, preparing to bridge the gap between coded message and decisive action. He aligned his next steps with the precise cues, aware that one miscalculation could undo the advantage. The executives' underestimation was their greatest weakness. Michael laughed at a minor hesitation. Jonathan scowled at a momentary pause, and neither realized that Andre not only understood Mandarin fluently, but had also tracked their pattern of arrogance, analyzed their psychological tendencies, and prepared a perfect silent countermeasure. For Andre, this was no longer a matter of observation alone. It was a test of courage, skill, and the ability to turn invisibility into power. He carried not just the knowledge of robotics, languages, and culture, but the lived experience of being underestimated, overlooked, and dismissed. Every lesson from his childhood, every mentor session in Beijing, every microaggression he had endured in New York's corporate corridors converged in this moment. He was ready to act. And yet, patience remained his weapon. He did not rush, did not reveal prematurely. Every document, every whispered word, every subtle signal would be leveraged at the exact right moment. The invisible strategist, the silent observer, and the underestimated assistant were preparing to alter the course of a billion-dollar negotiation, and no one in the room had the faintest idea it was about to happen. The moment arrived. A subtle tap from Wei Jiang, the carefully chosen signal they had both been waiting for, echoed almost imperceptibly across the polished conference table. "Sleeping dragon," Andre whispered under his breath, a shiver of anticipation running down his spine. The room, still tense from hours of condescension, arrogance, and impatience, was about to experience a shift that no one could have predicted. Andre straightened, shoulders back, eyes calm yet burning with quiet authority. The executives, still, laughing at minor cultural misunderstandings, remained blissfully unaware that their carefully constructed dominance was about to crumble. Andre began methodically. First, he ensured all eyes would focus where they needed to. With smooth, deliberate movements, he connected his phone to the room's projector, displaying files Camilla had sent him moments before. Evidence gathered meticulously over weeks. SEC complaints, internal emails from Miller Corp executives, contracts with suspiciously convoluted clauses, all appeared in crisp resolution on the giant screen. The pattern was unmistakable. A series of predatory acquisitions targeting Asian companies, leveraging investor prejudice and designed to siphon technology without fair compensation. The executive's confident smiles faltered, replaced by sudden uncertainty. "Gentlemen," Andre began, his voice steady and precise, echoing through the cavernous boardroom, "I believe you need to see exactly what we're dealing with." His tone carried the weight of knowledge, preparation, and a calm certainty that immediately captured attention. Jonathan Miller froze mid-sip of his scotch, the amber liquid trembling slightly in the glass. Michael Turner, who had been pacing with theatrical impatience, stopped abruptly, eyes narrowing at the projections. The room's previous laughter and arrogance dissolved into silence, replaced by unease, confusion, and a growing sense of dread. Andre guided them carefully, walking them through the evidence with the clarity of someone intimately familiar with both the technology and the culture behind it. Each email, each internal memo, each suspicious clause was explained not as accusation, but as factual demonstration of patterns they had left exposed. "This is not speculation," he said, pointing to the dates, the companies involved, the repeated modus operandi. "This is documented. Your history of corporate misconduct is public record. These Asian companies, your prior targets, were misled and exploited. Dragon Tech will not be next." Wei Jiang, silent until now, stood slowly. The room seemed to shrink around him, the air charged with authority. He spoke in perfect English, his voice firm yet measured, cutting through the tension with clarity. "You assumed my silence was weakness. You assumed your arrogance would give you control. You underestimated the observant, the informed, and the disciplined. This is not about money. This is about integrity, justice, and the consequences of deception." Every word resonated, aligning seamlessly with Andre's revelation of the Miller Corp executive's misconduct. Jonathan's hand trembled slightly as he reached for the whiskey glass, the earlier bravado nowhere to be found. Michael turned pale, realizing for the first time that the carefully constructed illusions of power they had relied on for decades were unraveling. Andre's presence was no longer invisible. His knowledge, preparation, and timing had transformed him into the fulcrum of control. The executives' condescension, their casual prejudice, and their assumption that Wei Jiang and Andre were powerless were all laid bare for anyone paying attention. Andre pressed another button, bringing up audio recordings and corroborating documentation. The room filled with the undeniable proof of the executives' previous attempts to manipulate contracts and exploit cultural biases. Emails detailing strategies to confuse Asian partners, SEC complaints, and fraudulent clauses, all projected. For every eye to see, the arrogance that had once seemed untouchable evaporated, replaced by fear and disbelief. Jonathan stammered, struggling to find words. Michael's chair scraped against the floor as he sank, utterly defeated. Throughout the exposure, Andre maintained calm authority. He allowed the evidence to speak, interjecting only to clarify technical details or cultural nuances. Each explanation reinforced not only Wei Jiang's expertise, but also the precision and intelligence of the intervention. The narrative of invisible, underestimated individuals overturning arrogance became tangible in the room, a living demonstration of skill overcoming prejudice. Wei Jiang returned to his seat, nodding subtly at Andre. "You see, gentlemen," he said, voice even but firm, "the price of underestimating people is higher than you imagined." The boardroom, once dominated by ridicule and condescension, had been transformed into a chamber of reflection and awe. Andre's intervention had not only prevented the theft of Dragon Tech's technology, but had turned the tables entirely. The predators were now the prey, exposed and powerless. By the end of the hour, the executive's arrogance had been stripped away. What remained was a silent acknowledgement of the power of intelligence, preparation, and moral courage. The invisible assistant, fluent in languages, cultures, and strategy, and the quiet billionaire who had chosen silence as a weapon, had rewritten the rules of engagement. Andre Silva and Wei Jiang had not only preserved DragonTech's integrity, but had demonstrated a profound lesson. Underestimated talent, strategic patience, and careful observation could overcome prejudice, hubris, and years of assumed dominance. The aftermath of the boardroom revelation was immediate and unrelenting. Within hours, DragonTech's legal team coordinated with regulators, journalists, and investors, ensuring that Miller Corp's fraudulent activities would not go unnoticed. Andre Silva, once invisible, became the center of attention, not for ego, but for the intelligence, courage, and meticulous planning he had displayed. His role in exposing the executive's misconduct was recognized by Wei Jiang, who, for the first time in a public setting, acknowledged Andre's contributions. The quiet assistant who had moved through the room unnoticed was no longer merely a servant. He was the strategist who had safeguarded the company, the technology, and the principle of justice itself. Wei Jiang called a private meeting with Andre shortly after, his expression calm yet filled with respect. "Andre," he began, voice deliberate, "your observation, your patience, and your understanding have changed the course of this company. I want you to join DragonTech America in a key strategic role. Your insight, knowledge of language, and understanding of both cultures will shape our future." Andre's chest swelled with quiet pride. The offer was more than a promotion. It was an acknowledgement that intelligence and integrity could not remain hidden forever. Meanwhile, the fallout for Jonathan Miller and Michael Turner was swift and unforgiving. The SEC launched formal investigations, uncovering a history of manipulative contracts and predatory behavior toward foreign partners. Public outrage fueled media coverage, and within months, Miller filed for personal bankruptcy, losing his home, assets, and the respect he had built over decades. Michael Turner faced criminal charges, eventually serving time in prison, his professional reputation irreparably damaged. Their arrogance, once assumed to be untouchable, had been dismantled by strategy, patience, and the observation of someone they had dismissed as invisible. Andre assumed his new role as Vice President of International Strategic Relations, a position that granted him not only authority but the opportunity to shape DragonTech America's global vision. The company's acquisition of Miller Corp, secured for a fraction of the original offer they had so arrogantly rejected, was a testament to both strategic foresight and the consequences of underestimating hidden talent. From his office on the 150th floor, Andre looked out over Manhattan, the skyline reflecting not just wealth, but the power of preparation and moral courage. Every decision, every negotiation, every moment of careful observation had led to this view, not only of the city, but of the lessons learned through struggle, silence, and action. Reflecting on the events, Andre realized the depth of the lesson they had all experienced. Courage alone was insufficient without preparation. Knowledge alone was meaningless without the strategic patience to apply it. The combination of observation, skill, and ethical resolve had dismantled decades of arrogance and prejudice in a single evening. He thought of Wei Jiang's mentorship years ago, the hours in Beijing when they had discussed engineering, culture, and strategy, and realized that true leadership came not from domination, but from seeing potential in the overlooked and underestimated. Wei Jiang, meanwhile, leveraged the momentum to launch programs that extended beyond corporate success: scholarships for young Black students interested in technology, mentorship programs emphasizing inclusion and diversity, and workshops for bridging cultural gaps became standard initiatives at DragonTech. Andre personally oversaw several of these programs, ensuring that access to opportunity was not dictated by background, skin color, or nationality, but by talent, curiosity, and dedication. The quiet lessons learned in the boardroom, the value of patience, observation, and unseen skill, were now being passed on to the next generation of innovators. Even within the company, Andre's presence became symbolic. He moved through Dragon, Tech America, not as an outsider, not as an invisible assistant, but as a strategic leader whose insights were sought after in every high-level decision. Employees who had once underestimated the power of quiet observation and preparation now learned that intelligence often manifests where least expected. The narrative of the invisible being the most powerful, the underestimated becoming the decisive factor, became part of the company culture, influencing hiring practices, team structures, and global negotiations. The final image of Andre, overlooking the city from his office, encapsulated both triumph and justice. The skyline reflected opportunity, achievement, and the undeniable truth that those who are dismissed or overlooked may hold the keys to transformation. Wei Jiang's empire was secure not only financially but morally, guided by the principles of fairness, respect, and strategic intelligence. The empire of arrogance and prejudice that Jonathan and Michael had relied on was dismantled, replaced by a system in which merit, preparation, and integrity dictated outcomes. In the end, the lesson was clear. Never underestimate anyone, because hidden talent and intelligence can change outcomes in ways the world cannot anticipate. Andre Silva, once invisible, now stood as living proof that courage combined with preparation and strategic insight could overcome arrogance, prejudice, and decades of assumed superiority. From the shadows to the skyline, his journey symbolized the power of observation, patience, and justice in a world too often blinded by assumption and ignorance.